All right, so now let's look at one more piece in the document. So I'm going to look in document and look at some other methods that we might have. So I'm in the document object in case that was not clear. So I'm in the document object and it is a child of the window document. Okay, great. And we were looking at methods and properties in the last video, and we have used this already, but I'm going to use it again last week. Get element by ID. So this is a method of the document object, and it returns the element that has the ID attribute with the specified value. So what does that mean? And let's use it now. All right, so I have put on my page since our last video an image, and I've attached several what we used to call attributes, but I'm now going to call properties. The SRC property, the alt property, I gave it a width, and I gave it an ID. All right, so what I'd like to do then is I'm going to just copy and paste so you don't have to watch me fat finger. I'm going to console log document. Remember, I don't have to have window, it's implied. Document.getElementById, and I'm going to use the ID that I gave to the image. So here the image ID is Stitch, and so I'm using that in the parentheses. So document get element by ID is going to go grab this object. I don't want you thinking of an HTML tag anymore. It's an object. And if we look at the results in my live served page here, we can see what is it console logging. It's console logging that entire object. So I have the whole object and all of its properties in the console log. All right, maybe or maybe not very useful. So what I'm going to do is change this up a little bit. I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. I'm going to create a variable utilizing that same idea. So using document get element by ID and then grabbing that object, and the hook between the two is the ID name. So ID name. So grab that object and put that entire object into my variable. Obviously, nothing's happening yet. So what I'm going to do next, just for visual, is I'm going to console log whatever is inside my variable. My variable is image object. So console log the value that's inside this variable. And if we look, we see that the value inside my image object is in fact an object. We've seen before that variables can hold a string. Variables can hold a number. Well, now we're seeing that variables can also hold an entire object. And what that means to us is that we will be able to remember with that dot notation we saw earlier, we can use the object, which is now image in the variable, and the dot notation to drill into its individual properties, meaning that, and I'll put these side by side so we can see them together. So if my object is this image, then how do I get to the properties? Well, that's where that dot notation comes. So now this is technically an object. It's my image object. And if I console log, let's say .alt, which is a property of my object, we're going to see my first console log, which is just the variable, is console logging our entire object. But now we're console logging a particular property of our object. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a moment and I want you to think, or you should put this video on pause and think, see if you can come up with how would I output, let's see, how could I output the ID? So ID is in fact a property, and I want to output what that value is, which happens to be Stitch. So can you think of how you might do that? Put the video on hold. And I'm sure that you put the video on hold now, and I'm going to Control V. We decided that this is the object. So in order to get at this object's properties, I use the dot notation. So object dot, and then if you put in the dot ID, if I can spell, which is why I copy and paste a lot, So now when we put in the ID, we should get just the stitch. So the important takeaway here is recognizing that we are now talking about objects and properties. And in order to grab a hold of each individual property, we first need to grab a hold of the object. In this case, we grabbed the object with the get element by ID, which gave us the entire image object, and we stuck that into a variable. And then we, in that variable, this console logged our entire object. And then with the dot notation, we could get to those objects' individual properties.